In this video, I'm going to introduce you to the cellular organization of the brain. The nervous system, like all tissues in your body, is made out of cells, and there are two broad classes of cells that make up the brain: neurons and glia. Neurons are nerve cells. These are the cells that are excitable, meaning that they fire action potentials. They receive and they process information, and they make decisions. They're the ones that signal target cells, and those target cells might be other neurons, muscles, or glands. Glial cells are a diverse group of supporting cells whose functions include providing structural support, serving as scaffolds to guide neurons in development, insulating the axons of neurons, supplying nutrients and regulating ion concentrations, modulating neuronal excitability and synaptic connections, and destroying pathogens and repairing damage. Well, as you might guess, from this long list that I've provided for glia, they really deserve their own video, and so for the rest of this video, I'm just going to focus on neurons. Let's look at neuron structure. Well, like all cells in the body, the neuron will contain a nucleus. This is contained in the cell body. It's also called the soma. The nucleus itself is going to contain the DNA. That's the genetic material. The nucleus is surrounded by endoplasmic reticulum. And there's also Golgi apparatus, and together these are involved in the synthesis and sorting of proteins. The cell body typically contains many mitochondria. These produce energy for the cell, and there'll be other elements such as the cytoskeleton and other kinds of organelles that are present. Now to this point, everything that I've told you is present in more or less every cell in the body, but neurons are special in that they have a number of other structures. They have these cytoplasmic extensions. These come in two forms. First, there are structures called dendrites. These are true extensions of the cell body. There are typically many of them, and their function is to receive inputs from other neurons. This is the part of the nerve cell that we can think of as antennae that are collecting information in order to make a decision. The other type of extension from the cell body is the axon. The axon is the part of the nerve cell that will propagate an action potential. It can carry information long distances away. The action potential is typically initiated at a structure called the hillock, where the axon differentiates from the cell body. And also in vertebrates, you should know that most axons, but not all axons, are myelinated, so they're covered with a myelin sheath, and this is one of the functions for glial cells. The axon terminates in what's called the axon terminal, and this is where it will form a synapse onto the target cell. In this cartoon, another dendrite. Well, now that we know the basic structure for the neuron, how are these organized in the brain tissue? You might imagine that the cells could just be scattered throughout the tissue in a random fashion, but that's not what happens. Instead, in brains, the tissue usually adopts one of two configurations. In the first configurations, the cell bodies are clustered together. We call a clump of nerve cell bodies like this a nucleus. It's a cluster of neural cell bodies in the central nervous system. We'll sometimes see clusters of nerve cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system as well, and in that region we usually use the term ganglion to refer to a cluster of nerve cells. The axons tend to bundle together too, and these are called tracts. Well, that's one arrangement of nerve cells. The other arrangement is when the nerve cells line up to form a layer or a sheet of cells. We call this a lamina, and in some parts of the brain you can have multiple lamina that are piled on top of one another. We'll have tracts that join those axons together, and also that may carry input from other neurons to this region in the brain. Well, I think at this point I've exhausted my cartoons, so I'll move on to some actual images to show you what it looks like. Well, here's a frontal section through a human brain. What I want to show you is that these cell bodies that are clumped together either in clumps or in sheets, and the nerve tracts are really separate from one another, and we can actually see this even in an unstained brain section. We use the term gray matter to refer to the cell bodies and the dendrites, and these can again occur in those two configurations. We can have cell bodies that are arranged in layers. Perhaps the most notable example of this is in the cortex, where there's a set of about 6 cell layers. The other arrangement can be nuclei, where there are clusters of cell bodies, and we see that here in this deep cerebral structure. We use a different term to refer to the nerve tracts, and this is white matter. White matter will refer to the bundles of myelinated axons, and in fact the reason that it appears white, even in this unstained section, is because the myelin's very fatty. Here I've highlighted the white matter to show how extensive it is in this section of the brain. These bundles of axons come in different flavors. Sometimes they connect regions within the same hemisphere. Sometimes they connect the two hemispheres to one another, and in fact this section shows one of the most major fiber tracts in the brain called the corpus callosum, which connects the left and the right cerebral hemispheres. Sometimes these nerve tracts carry the axons of projection neurons, meaning that they take information from one region like the cerebrum and they'll carry it to the brainstem or some other brain region. There's an example of that in this image as well here. This is the internal capsule. Well, I want to finish by showing you just a few real images of what these structures look like so you can get a sense for how extensive they are. In this image here, part of the brain has been dissected away, and what I want to draw your attention to is this structure here. This is the corpus callosum connecting the right and the left cerebral hemispheres. Here's another example. This fiber tract connects different regions of the brain. This particular structure includes the internal capsule, which I showed you in the cross-section earlier, and the fibers from the cerebral neurons are projecting all the way down to the brainstem. Finally, let me give you an example of a fiber tract that connects two brain regions within the cerebrum. This is the arcuate fasciculus, which connects the temporal lobe and the frontal lobe. In particular, this connects Wernicke's area to the frontal lobe, where there's Broca's area. Damage to white matter tracts can be devastating. For example, individuals who damage the arcuate fasciculus in their left hemisphere lose the ability to produce language, even though Wernicke's area and Broca's area may both be intact. Clinically, knowing the white matter tracts is very important.